Husband and wife lock and starve the old father in an iron cage, and the ending. Mr. Stephen had once been a wealthy and highly respected businessman in town. For decades, he had worked tirelessly, building his fortune from nothing. After his wife's passing, he decided to transfer the management of his assets to his only son, Jason, hoping to enjoy his later years peacefully with his grandchildren. "Son, I have worked my whole life. Now it's time for me to rest." Jason accepted the power of attorney document with a fake smile. Beside him, his wife, Lucy, held his hand tightly, her eyes gleaming with excitement. They pretended to be emotional, vowing to take good care of Mr. Stephen. "Don't worry, Dad. You won't have to think about anything anymore," Lucy said softly, but there was a flicker of greed in her eyes. At first, Mr. Stephen didn't notice any changes. But soon, Jason's true nature began to show. First, his monthly allowance was gradually reduced. He had a habit of going out for coffee with his friends every morning, but Jason said, "Dad, if you need anything, just tell me. There's no need for you to carry cash around." Mr. Stephen frowned but didn't argue. Then, Jason continued cutting his expenses, even hiring a new maid, Gracie, under the pretense of saving costs. "Dad, you don't need a personal servant anymore. Gracie can handle everything in the house." Gracie was a middle-aged woman, strict but compassionate. She quickly noticed the unfair way Jason treated his father but didn't dare to openly oppose him. Lucy also changed her attitude. Before, she had pretended to be gentle, but now, she didn't even bother hiding her disdain. One afternoon, while Mr. Stephen was reading in the living room, Lucy walked in and looked at him with irritation. "Can you stop leaving books everywhere? This house isn't a library." Mr. Stephen was stunned for a moment. For the first time in his life, he felt like an outsider in his own home. Jason soon decided to clear out Mr. Stephen's spacious room on the second floor and move him into a small room on the ground floor that had previously been a storage space. "Dad, you only need a bed and a wardrobe. Moving down here will be more convenient." The room was dark, damp, and had no windows. Mr. Stephen felt like he was being locked in a tiny box. But he didn't say anything, only nodding quietly. Matthew, his grandson, was the only one who still cared about him. The 12-year-old boy often found ways to sneak into his grandfather's room. "Grandpa, are you sad?" Matthew asked softly, his eyes filled with concern. Mr. Stephen gave a weak smile. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm fine." But Matthew wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what his parents were doing. Lucy soon noticed that Matthew frequently spent time with his grandfather. One evening, she grabbed her son's wrist and hissed, "From now on, you're not allowed to go near him. Do you understand?" Matthew was startled. "But why, Mom? Grandpa didn't do anything wrong." "Shut up. He's just a useless old man who only knows how to talk about the past. Focus on your studies and don't waste time on him." Matthew ran to his room, tears streaming down his face. He couldn't understand why his parents were so cruel. One evening, when Mr. Stephen asked Jason for some money to buy medicine, Jason coldly replied, "What medicine do you need? Tell me, and I'll buy it. But don't think you can spend money like before." Mr. Stephen was speechless. This was no longer the son he had trusted. Another time, when he was sitting outside in the garden enjoying the fresh air, Lucy walked past him and muttered coldly, "Be careful not to trip and break a bone. This house isn't a hospital." Mr. Stephen closed his eyes, swallowing the bitterness rising in his throat. Mr. James, a longtime friend of Mr. Stephen, stopped by for a visit. But as soon as he reached the gate, Jason blocked his way. "Uncle James, my father doesn't want any visitors." James frowned. "Why? He used to love talking with me. My father is old now. He's no longer interested in reminiscing about the past." Please don't bother him." Jason slammed the gate shut in James's face, not giving him a chance to ask further questions. That night, as heavy rain poured down, Mr. Stephen stepped out into the backyard for some fresh air. But as soon as he did, he noticed a large metal cage sitting in the corner of the yard. His heart clenched. It was the old dog kennel where the family had once kept a German Shepherd years ago. But why had it been set up again? The answer came the very next morning. Jason walked into his father's room, holding a key in his hand. "Dad, I think you need a quiet place to reflect." "What do you mean?" Mr. Stephen asked slowly, but an overwhelming sense of dread was already creeping into his heart. Lucy smirked. "You'll find out soon enough." Before Mr. Stephen could react, two large men, Jason's new hired workers, stepped inside. They grabbed him roughly, dragging him toward the backyard. "Let me go." "What are you doing?" Mr. Stephen struggled, but he was too weak. Jason stood with his arms crossed, watching without a trace of sympathy. "You've lived long enough. You have no rights in this house anymore." The two men threw Mr. Stephen into the iron cage. He landed hard on the cold wooden floor. The cage door slammed shut, locking tight. Lucy crouched down, whispering in a mocking tone. "Stay here and think about all the foolish things you've done." With that, they turned and walked away, leaving Mr. Stephen alone in the freezing rain. He shivered, unable to believe that his own son could treat him this way. But this was only the beginning of his nightmare. The rain was bitterly cold, cutting through his skin like knives. Mr. Stephen curled up inside the metal cage, his frail body trembling violently. His soaked clothes clung to his wrinkled skin. He tried to shrink into himself, but the bone-chilling wind seeped through every gap in the cage. Was this his son's punishment for him? Was this the reward for a lifetime of hard work building his family and fortune? Tears streamed down his aged face. He had once believed that no matter how much Jason changed, he was still his son. But now, he finally realized how wrong he had been. Inside the brightly lit mansion, Jason and Lucy's laughter echoed through the halls. They were enjoying dinner together as if nothing had happened. By the time the sun rose, Mr. Stephen no longer had the strength to shiver. The storm from the previous night had drained the last warmth from his body. His head spun from hunger and exhaustion. The backyard door creaked open. Gracie approached, carrying a small tray. She glanced around nervously before quickly sliding the tray through a gap in the cage. "Mr. Stephen, eat this. You can't let yourself starve." Mr. Stephen lifted his weary eyes to look at her. In his cloudy gaze, there was both gratitude and deep despair. With trembling hands, he picked up the piece of dry bread and the cold bottle of water. "Thank you, Gracie." His voice was hoarse. Gracie bit her lip, her eyes welling with tears. "I can't do much, but I'll try to help you." Inside the house, Lucy stood on the balcony, her arms crossed as she observed the scene below. A sneer spread across her lips. "Gracie! Who gave you permission to feed that old man?" Gracie jolted in fear and turned around, bowing her head. "Madam. I just thought he needed." "Shut up. Don't forget who pays your salary. If I catch you helping him again, you'll be out of a job immediately." Gracie bit her lip, not daring to argue. She cast one last glance at Mr. Stephen before retreating inside. Lucy stepped down, looking at the old man as he chewed on the hard, stale bread. She smirked. "You think we'll feel sorry for you and let you go? Keep dreaming." Mr. Stephen didn't reply. He simply swallowed each sip of water quietly, as if trying to hold on to the last bit of strength he had left. 3 days passed. Mr. Stephen was only given a little dry bread and cold water. At night, the bone-chilling cold made it impossible for him to sleep. His body gradually weakened, but his eyes still held on to the last remnants of pride. The neighbors started whispering. Mr. James, Mr. Stephen's close friend, passed by and noticed something unusual. One morning, he stood at the gate of the mansion and called out loudly. "Jason! I want to see Mr. Stephen." Jason stepped out, holding a cup of coffee, smirking. "Uncle James, my father is old now. He doesn't want to see anyone anymore. Don't bother him." James frowned. "But I heard he hasn't been seen in town lately." "Where is he?" Lucy walked out from inside, smirking. "He just wants to rest. Don't worry so much." Although Jason and Lucy tried to cover things up, James still felt that something was wrong. That night, Matthew sneaked out of his room, quietly opening the back door. Holding his breath, he looked around before running quickly to the iron cage. "Grandpa." Mr. Stephen opened his eyes, weakly looking at Matthew. "Matthew, you shouldn't be here. I can't let you suffer like this." Matthew trembled, tears streaming down his face. "What they're doing to you isn't fair." Mr. Stephen forced a smile. "It's okay, don't worry." Matthew shook his head and pulled a small piece of bread from his pocket. "I stole this from the kitchen. Eat it." Mr. Stephen looked at his grandson, his eyes filled with emotion. He reached out to take the bread, but at that moment, a sharp voice rang out. "Matthew!" The boy flinched and turned around. Lucy stood there, her face furious. "What are you doing here?" Matthew, terrified, took a step back but still tried to stand in front of the cage. "I just want to help Grandpa." Slap! Lucy struck Matthew hard across the face, sending him crashing to the ground. "I told you to stay away from that old man, didn't I?" Jason stepped out, shaking his head at Matthew. "You're such an idiot. If you do this again, don't blame me for being harsh." Matthew clutched his face, tears falling uncontrollably. He looked at his grandfather through the bars, then quietly ran back inside the house. Mr. Stephen clenched his fists, his whole body trembling with rage. "Jason, you are no longer my son." Jason laughed. "Father, don't think you still have the right to say things like that." With that, he grabbed Lucy's hand and walked back into the house, leaving Mr. Stephen alone in the freezing darkness. Matthew was strictly forbidden from leaving his room at night. Gracie was closely monitored. No one could help Mr. Stephen anymore. At night, he no longer had the strength to fight the cold. His breaths grew weaker. One morning, Jason opened the door and frowned when he saw Mr. Stephen lying motionless in the cage. "Dad? Stop pretending to be dead. No one's going to pity you." But Mr. Stephen didn't respond. His body was trembling, his lips turning purple. Lucy crossed her arms. "Is he finally about to go?" Jason laughed, pulled open the cage door, and nudged the old man with his foot. Mr. Stephen slowly opened his clouded eyes, his voice weak and hoarse. "Jason. I once thought, you were my pride." Jason crouched down and whispered. "But you were wrong." Lucy burst out laughing. "Let's see how much longer he can hold on." They locked the cage again and continued walking back into the house, leaving the old man alone in the freezing winter air. Every morning, as the sun rose, its rays pierced through the gaps of the iron cage, but they brought no warmth to Mr. Stephen. His body had surpassed its limits, yet his spirit refused to break. For days, he had only been given stale bread and cold water. The harsh winter cold drained his strength even faster. Every night, he shivered violently, the fever consuming him, leaving him teetering between consciousness and delirium. Jason and Lucy continued their lavish lives, completely indifferent to the old man wasting away in the cage. But Mr. Stephen wasn't only collapsing from hunger and cold. He was collapsing from the cruel betrayal of the son he had once loved more than anything. Today, Mr. Stephen could no longer sit up. He could only lie there, his hazy eyes staring up at the gray sky. Gracie secretly peeked out at the backyard, her hands gripping her apron tightly. She couldn't take it anymore. Rushing into the kitchen, she poured a bowl of hot soup and quickly stepped outside. She knelt beside the iron cage, her voice filled with concern. "Mr. Stephen, you have to eat something. You won't survive." Mr. Stephen slowly opened his eyes, but his hands were too weak to hold the bowl. Gracie bit her lip, scooping a spoonful of soup and gently bringing it to his lips. "No, don't let them find out," Mr. Stephen murmured weakly. "I don't care anymore. You'll die if this continues." But at that moment, a cold voice spoke behind her. "Gracie." She froze. Lucy stood there, arms crossed, her eyes sharp as ice. "What did I tell you?" Gracie quickly placed the bowl down, stammering, "Ma'am, he." Slap. A vicious slap landed across Gracie's face, knocking her to the ground. "You idiot. You really thought you could do something without us knowing?" Lucy hissed, her eyes burning with fury. Jason stepped out of the house, glancing at the scene before him, then smirked. He walked over, snatched the bowl of soup, and dumped it onto the ground. "Father doesn't need to eat. He just needs to lie there and think about his mistakes." Gracie struggled to her feet, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to say something, but the cruel look in Lucy's eyes silenced her. She lowered her head and quietly ran back into the house. Mr. Stephen slowly closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down onto the frozen ground. Matthew sat in his room, biting his lip, his eyes red with fury. He couldn't take it anymore. Even though he was forbidden from going near his grandfather, even though he had been beaten, Matthew refused to give up. One night, when the house had fallen into deep sleep, he quietly opened his bedroom door and crept downstairs. He took a piece of bread from the kitchen and carefully made his way outside. But just as he neared the iron cage, a large hand suddenly grabbed him. "You little brat." Jason tightened his grip around Matthew's arm, dragging him back into the house. Matthew struggled. "Let me go. You're killing Grandpa." "Shut up." Jason shoved Matthew onto the floor. Lucy stepped forward, a leather belt in her hand, her gaze icy. "You just don't know how to listen, do you?" Matthew trembled but refused to back down. "Grandpa doesn't deserve this." Crack. The belt came down, leaving a red welt on Matthew's arm. He bit his lip until it bled, but he didn't cry. He only looked at his parents with pure hatred in his eyes. Lucy gritted her teeth. "Next time, if you disobey again, I'll break your legs." Matthew said nothing, only lowered his head. But inside him, a fire of hatred was burning. That night, Mr. Stephen saw Matthew being beaten, but he couldn't do anything. He could only clench his weak fists, his entire body trembling with fury. He knew that if no one helped him, he would die here. The next morning, Jason stepped outside, crossing his arms as he looked down at him. "Father, do you see now? No one can help you." Mr. Stephen opened his eyes, but they were different now. No longer desperate, no longer pleading. Jason smirked. "You hate me, don't you? But you're powerless now." Lucy stood beside him, scoffing. "He won't last much longer. We just have to wait." Jason tapped the iron cage lightly before turning his back and walking away. Mr. Stephen watched his son's retreating figure, his heart filled with bitterness. The neighbors knew. They had heard the old man's groans at night. They had seen Matthew sneaking around with bruises covering his face. But no one dared to do anything. Jason was powerful. His family controlled much of the town's wealth. Who would dare go against him? Mr. James, the only one brave enough to stand up, was threatened by Jason. "You want to stick your nose where it doesn't belong? Be careful, or you might lose your shop." James fell silent, but inside, his anger burned. That night, the cold was even harsher than usual. Mr. Stephen curled up, his body shivering violently. His breathing was heavy and labored. In the darkness, he heard footsteps. A quiet voice called out. "Grandpa." "Matthew." Mr. Stephen struggled to open his eyes but had no strength left to answer. Matthew reached through the bars, grasping his grandfather's hand. It was ice cold. "Grandpa, I promise. I won't let this continue." But Mr. Stephen could no longer hear him. His breathing grew fainter. Matthew panicked. "Grandpa. Don't fall asleep. You have to stay strong." But Mr. Stephen only gave a weak smile before closing his eyes. Matthew bit his lip until it bled. No. This couldn't go on. Mr. Stephen no longer felt the passage of time. The cold had seeped into his bones, the relentless hunger had drained him completely. Every attempt to move sent waves of pain through his brittle joints, so intense that he couldn't even cry out. Yet, what hurt him more than anything was the look in Matthew's eyes as he peered through the bars. The boy was no longer the carefree child he once was. Now, his gaze held only sorrow and rage. "Grandpa, I'm sorry." Matthew had whispered that last night before Lucy had dragged him back to his room and locked the door. Jason no longer cared about his father's condition. He was only concerned with his business, and now that his father was nothing more than a hollow shell, he didn't even bother looking at the iron cage as he passed through the yard. Lucy was different. She seemed to enjoy watching the old man deteriorate. Every day, she would stand outside, arms crossed, observing him like a predator waiting for its prey to collapse. "Old man, how are you feeling today?" Mr. Stephen didn't respond. He no longer had the strength to react. Lucy smirked and leaned in closer. "I bet you regret it now, don't you? Leaving everything to Jason." Mr. Stephen opened his eyes weakly, his voice barely more than a breath. "You will face retribution." Lucy burst into loud laughter. "Retribution? Don't dream. Who's going to help you? Mr. James? Or those cowardly neighbors?" She stood up and signaled to the new servant, a large man named Ray, to step forward. "Clean up this cage. I don't want the backyard looking filthy." Ray stepped forward, grabbed a bucket of cold water, and poured it straight over Mr. Stephen. The freezing water sent a violent shiver through the old man, as if every cell in his body recoiled from the shock. Lucy laughed in amusement before turning and walking away. That night, Matthew stared at the bruise on his arm, a mark from the previous beating. But this time, he wasn't afraid anymore. He remembered his grandfather's words. "Matthew, if you can do the right thing, never hesitate." He couldn't wait any longer. If this went on, Grandpa would die. He carefully opened his bedroom door and tiptoed into the hallway. The house was dark, except for the light from the living room. Jason and Lucy were still drinking, laughing together. Matthew took a deep breath and sneaked into his father's study. On the desk, the key to the iron cage lay there. He reached for it, but at that moment, a voice rang out behind him. "What are you doing here?" Matthew jolted and turned around. It was Jason. Jason stepped forward, his gaze sharp as a blade. "What are you trying to do? Steal the key?" Matthew backed away, but Jason was faster. He grabbed the boy's collar and yanked him back. "Dad! Let me go." Matthew struggled. Slap. A harsh slap struck Matthew across the face. Lucy stepped out from the living room, crossing her arms as she observed the scene. "Acting up again? Just like a wild horse that can't be tamed." Matthew held his cheek, but his eyes still burned with defiance. "You can't do this to Grandpa. He doesn't deserve to be locked out there." Jason gritted his teeth, lifted Matthew off the ground, and threw him harshly onto the floor. "You little brat. You have no right to tell me what to do." Lucy smirked, then leaned down and whispered. "You're just a child, Matthew. What can you possibly do? Matthew clenched his fists, holding back his tears. But he knew, this time, he wouldn't give up. The next morning, the air was colder than usual. Gracie looked out into the yard, and her heart clenched at the sight of Mr. Stephen lying motionless in the cage. She rushed out, dropping to her knees beside him. "Mr. Stephen. Are you all right?" No response. Gracie's hands trembled as she placed them on his forehead. Cold as ice. "No, please, don't." She turned back, shouting. "Jason. He's dying." But Jason didn't even care. "If he dies, even better." Lucy nodded in agreement. "Sooner or later, this will all be over." Gracie stared in horror at the two heartless people in front of her. "You two, you're not human anymore." Jason crossed his arms, smirking. "What do you want to do? Call the police?" "Go ahead. Then you'll see what happens." Gracie froze. She knew she couldn't do anything, but Matthew could. She went back inside, quietly looking for Matthew. When she found the boy sitting in the corner of the room, his face still swollen and red from the beating the night before, she lowered her voice and whispered. "Matthew, you are the only hope." Matthew looked up, his eyes burning with resentment. He already knew what he had to do. Before nightfall, Matthew sneaked outside and knelt beside the iron cage. "Grandpa, I won't let them do this to you anymore." Mr. Stephen opened his eyes, gazing weakly at his grandson. A faint, exhausted smile crossed his face. "Matthew, don't be reckless." Matthew squeezed his grandfather's hand through the gaps in the cage. "I promise. I will save you." A cold wind blew past, causing Mr. Stephen's silver hair to flutter. But this time, he didn't feel the cold anymore. Because he knew, Matthew wouldn't abandon him. And this was his last hope. Mr. Stephen could no longer feel the biting wind slicing through his skin. His body was stiff, his breathing weak, his eyes closed, as if one stronger gust of wind could carry him into an eternal sleep. But deep down, he knew he couldn't give up now. Not when Matthew was still fighting for him. Not when his only grandson hadn't given up. After being caught trying to steal the key to save his grandfather, Matthew was watched more closely than ever by Jason and Lucy. Lucy even ordered Ray, their loyal servant, to lock Matthew's bedroom door at night so he couldn't sneak out. Every day, he was forced to stay in his room, forbidden from going near his grandfather. But Matthew refused to give up. Every time he looked out the window and saw Mr. Stephen curled up in the iron cage in the yard, it felt like a fire was raging inside him. He knew that if he didn't act soon, his grandfather would die. The neighbors were no longer indifferent. At first, they feared Jason, his power, and his wealth. But the moans in the night, the growing rumors, they could no longer turn a blind eye. Mrs. Eleanor, an elderly woman living next to Jason's house, quietly asked Gracie. "I hear groaning at night. What is happening?" Gracie glanced around, afraid of being overheard. But then, she decided to speak in a hushed voice. "Mr. Stephen, they're torturing him." Eleanor inhaled sharply, her hands trembling. "My God! We have to call the police." "They can't do this to him," said another neighbor, Mr. Gabriel. But then, another voice spoke up, filled with fear. "What do you think the police will do? Jason has connections. If we report him, will anyone dare to take action?" Silence fell over the group. No one dared to stand against Jason. 2 days later, Mr. Stephen's condition was worse than ever. That morning, when Lucy and Jason stepped outside, they saw the old man lying motionless, his frail body barely breathing, so weak it was almost imperceptible. Lucy crossed her arms and shrugged. "Looks like today might be his last." Jason looked at him, then said indifferently. "Good. The sooner, the less hassle." And with that, they walked away. But Matthew had seen everything. Standing behind the glass door, his hands clenched into fists. I have to do something. I have to do something right now. After seeing his grandfather in such a critical state, Matthew knew he couldn't wait any longer. That night, while Jason and Lucy were fast asleep, the boy quietly climbed out of his bedroom window. He ran across the small road leading to Mr. James's house. When Matthew knocked frantically on the door, Mr. James immediately opened it, finding the boy with a worried face and tear-filled eyes. Matthew? What are you doing here at this hour? Mr. James, please help Grandpa. If we don't do something, he's going to die. James took a deep breath, his gaze heavy with burden. I've known about this for a long time, but I can't do anything, Matthew. Jason has too many connections. No. We have to do something. If we don't, he won't make it through the night. Matthew gripped Mr. James's hand tightly, his eyes filled with determination. James looked at the boy, then glanced toward the mansion. After a long silence, he nodded. You're right. We can't let this continue. But James alone wasn't enough. After leaving his house, Matthew ran to Mr. Gabriel's home, a middle-aged man who had once been an old friend of Mr. Stephen. The boy knocked on the door, breathless. Mr. Gabriel, please help me. Grandpa is dying. Gabriel froze. What's going on? Jason and Lucy, they're killing him. They locked him outside, starving him to death. Gabriel fell into deep thought, then sighed. I know Jason is cruel, but if we stand against him, who will protect us? Matthew shook his head, tears streaming down his face. Grandpa doesn't have much time left. If you don't help, there won't be another chance. Seeing the desperation on the boy's face, Gabriel felt his heart grow heavy. Finally, he nodded. All right. We'll take action. Matthew, James, and Gabriel sat together in the living room, making a plan. We can't report this to the local police. They'll turn a blind eye, James said. Then we need someone with enough power to force them to act, Gabriel suggested. Matthew thought for a moment, then his eyes lit up. Mayor Harris. James and Gabriel looked at each other. You mean Mayor Harris? Matthew nodded firmly. He's the only one who can force the police to take action. If we provide proof, he won't be able to ignore it. James thought for a moment, then asked. Do you have any proof, Matthew? Matthew clenched his fists. I will. He knew exactly what he had to do next. He had to record everything. He needed to prove Jason and Lucy's crimes to the entire town. He needed undeniable evidence. And to get that, he had to return to that house of horrors one more time. Matthew clenched his fists, his palms slick with sweat. He knew time was running out. If he didn't act now, his grandfather wouldn't make it through the night. He had to go back home. He had to record the evidence. Outside, Mr. James and Mr. Gabriel watched him with concern. Matthew, are you sure? James asked. The boy nodded, his eyes unwavering. I can't wait any longer. Gabriel sighed. Be careful, Matthew. If Jason catches you, he won't let you off easily. Matthew took a deep breath, then turned and ran straight home. When he reached the mansion, he didn't go through the front door but instead circled around to the back, climbing over the fence to enter the garden. Looking around and seeing no one, he tiptoed inside. Inside, the air was eerily silent. Jason and Lucy had already gone to bed, and the hallway lights were dim. Matthew moved quickly toward Jason's office. The door was locked, but he knew his father often kept a spare key on the bookshelf. He just needed to find it. Reaching up, he searched through the shelves, his heart pounding. Even the slightest noise could wake Jason. Click. The key. Matthew quickly grabbed it, silently slid it into the lock, and turned it. Inside, the dim light from the window cast shadows over the cluttered desk, piled high with papers. But Matthew didn't care about those documents. He was looking for something far more important. His father's old phone. Matthew remembered that Jason had a habit of recording videos of himself giving orders to his subordinates. If he was lucky, Jason might have accidentally recorded himself mistreating Grandpa. He rummaged through the drawers, his heart racing. Then his eyes lit up. The phone was right under a stack of folders. Matthew's hands trembled as he picked it up, unlocking it with the passcode he had secretly seen Jason enter before. Quickly, he checked the video library. There. He played an old video. Jason was standing in the backyard, looking down at Grandpa shivering in the iron cage. This old man will die soon. No need to waste any more effort, Jason sneered. Lucy stood beside him, shrugging. Then let him die slowly. The sooner, the better. Matthew bit his lip hard. This video was undeniable proof. But at that moment. Click. The door behind him swung open. Jason stood there, his eyes darkening as he saw the boy holding his phone. What the hell are you doing in my room? His voice was low, dangerous. Matthew's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. He hid the phone behind his back and took a step backward. Dad. I was just looking for something. Jason stepped closer, his gaze sharp as a blade. You think I'm stupid? He grabbed Matthew and yanked the phone from his hands. As soon as he saw the video playing on the screen, his face darkened. You dared to go through my things. Matthew didn't answer. He looked straight into his father's eyes, without a trace of fear. You're a monster. Smack. The slap landed hard across Matthew's face, knocking him to the floor. His cheek burned, but he didn't make a sound. Lucy came down the stairs, frowning. What's going on? Jason held up the phone. This little brat was snooping through my things. He was up to something. Lucy stepped closer, looking down at Matthew with a cold gaze. He's not a good little boy anymore. Jason gripped the phone tightly, then hurled it to the ground. Crack. The screen shattered. Matthew glared at his father. He knew the video had been destroyed. But he didn't panic. Because he had another plan. Jason grabbed Matthew, yanking him to his feet and dragging him outside. So you love helping that old man so much? Fine. You can sleep out here with him. He shoved Matthew into the iron cage with his grandfather. Clank. The lock snapped shut. Matthew fell to his knees, scraping them, but he didn't care. He turned to his grandfather, who was still breathing weakly. Grandpa, I'm here. Mr. Stephen opened his eyes, struggling to reach for the boy's hand. Matthew squeezed his grandfather's hand tightly and glared at Jason and Lucy with pure hatred. Lucy laughed. This kid is such an idiot. Jason crossed his arms, smirking. Leave him there. He'll learn soon enough. Then they turned and walked back into the house. Matthew took a deep breath. He knew he was trapped. But he wasn't afraid. Because before he had left Jason's office, he had done something important. He had sent that video. The night was cold, but inside Matthew, a spark of hope burned. He held his grandfather close and whispered. Grandpa, I sent the video to your friend. We won't have to suffer like this for much longer. Mr. Stephen squeezed his grandson's hand weakly, as if to say he believed in him. Outside, the wind howled, but this time, Matthew didn't feel the chill. He knew that if he could just wait a little longer, justice would come. The cold wind lashed at his face, but Matthew no longer felt it. He held on to his grandfather's hand, the only warmth left on this dark night. Grandpa, we won't be locked in here for much longer, he whispered, his determined eyes fixed on the glowing mansion. Mr. Stephen could only grip his grandson's hand weakly. His breaths grew heavier. Matthew bit his lip so hard it bled. He couldn't let his grandfather die here. He couldn't. Inside the mansion, Jason sat on the sofa, casually sipping his wine. Lucy stood by the window, arms crossed, glancing at the backyard. "How long do you think we should leave him out there?" she asked. Jason shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Once he realizes he's powerless, he'll learn to shut up." Lucy smirked. "Then I guess we'll leave him there until morning." Both of them laughed, as if what they had just done was nothing more than a joke. They had no idea that this time, they had made a grave mistake. Although locked in a cage, Matthew did not despair. He knew he couldn't just sit still. He looked around, searching for something that could help him escape. But the iron cage was too sturdy, and the lock couldn't be forced open with bare hands. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. There has to be a way. Suddenly, he remembered. The phone. When Jason had thrown his phone onto the floor, the screen had shattered, but it might still be working. And before being captured, Matthew had managed to send that video. Now, he just needed to wait a little longer. He turned to his grandfather, his voice gentle. "Grandpa, please hold on just a little longer." Mr. Stephen no longer had the strength to respond. But his eyes remained open, looking at his grandson with the last bit of light in them. At the same time, on the other side of town, Mr. James and Mr. Gabriel were sitting in the living room when the phone on the table vibrated. James quickly picked it up and checked. When he saw the video Matthew had sent, he held his breath. "Oh my God!" Gabriel whispered, his face turning pale. There was no time to hesitate. James immediately grabbed his phone and called the one person who could help them. "We have to act right away." The next morning, while Jason and Lucy were still asleep, a police car pulled up in front of the mansion's gate. An officer stepped out and knocked firmly on the door. "Knock, knock, knock." Jason frowned and pulled back the curtain to look outside. He hadn't expected the police to show up here. Lucy came down the stairs, whispering, "The police. Why are they here?" Jason took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He opened the door, pretending to be surprised. "What's going on, officer?" The officer, named Robert, stared at him. "We received a report about elder abuse at this residence." Jason let out a dry chuckle. "Abuse? Are you joking? Who would make up such a thing?" But Robert wasn't fooled. He said coldly, "We have evidence. And we're going to check." Jason clenched his fists, but he kept his composure. "All right, go ahead." As the police moved toward the backyard, Matthew heard footsteps and voices. He quickly lifted his head and realized, it was the police. "Grandpa. We're saved." Mr. Stephen stirred slightly, but he was too weak to react much. Officer Robert's eyes widened at the sight before him, an elderly man, frail and exhausted, lying inside a metal cage. Beside him, a thin boy with a face covered in bruises. Another officer gasped in outrage. "My God! They actually locked an old man in a cage." The cage door was quickly broken open. A paramedic rushed forward to check Mr. Stephen's condition. "He's severely malnourished. We need to get him to a hospital immediately." Matthew turned to the police, his eyes welling up with tears. "Please, arrest them. They tortured my grandpa." Robert clenched his fists. "Don't worry, kid. Justice will be served." As Jason and Lucy realized the police had uncovered the truth, they rushed outside. Lucy screamed in panic, "What's going on? Why are the police here?" Robert turned to them, his eyes full of contempt. "We have evidence that you two have been abusing your father." Jason forced a nervous smile. "There must be some misunderstanding. This is just a big mistake." Robert raised his phone and played the video that Matthew had sent. That old man will die soon. There's no need to waste any more effort. Jason froze. Lucy's face turned completely pale. Robert smirked. Do you have anything to say? Two officers stepped forward, twisted Jason and Lucy's arms behind their backs, and cuffed them tightly. Jason struggled. No. This is my house. You can't do this to me. Lucy screamed. We're innocent. Someone, please help us. But no one answered. Neighbors had gathered in front of the mansion, watching them with eyes full of fury. No one intended to save those monsters. As Jason and Lucy were taken away, Matthew turned back to his grandfather. The boy knelt down, grasping the old man's hand, his voice choked with emotion. Grandpa, we're safe now. You're going to be okay. Mr. Stephen gave a weak smile. For the first time in months, he felt relief. His grandson had done it. Matthew had saved him. Justice had finally arrived. The sun slowly began to rise over the rooftops, chasing away the cold darkness that had engulfed the town. But for Mr. Stephen, the long night of torment had already ended when the police broke down the iron cage and freed him from the hell his own son had created. He was placed on a stretcher, covered with a thick blanket, but his frail body still trembled from exhaustion. A doctor checked his heartbeat, his face tense. We need to get him to the hospital immediately. He's suffering from severe malnutrition. Matthew ran alongside the stretcher, clutching his grandfather's hand tightly. Grandpa, I'm here. Please don't leave me. Mr. Stephen opened his weary eyes and tried to squeeze his grandson's small hand. Matthew, you did it. Though drained, his eyes shone with pride. His little grandson had defeated the monster he himself had been unable to overcome. As the ambulance drove away, 2 police cars remained parked in front of Jason's mansion. He and Lucy stood in the yard, their hands bound, under the scornful gazes of their neighbors. Mrs. Eleanor, the oldest woman in town, stepped forward, her eyes filled with rage. I never thought I'd live to see the day when a son treats his own father with such cruelty. Jason, you're no longer human. Jason smirked bitterly. You people don't know anything. An older man, Mr. Gabriel, shouted in anger. We know more than enough. You locked your own father outside, leaving him to die in agony. If Matthew hadn't been brave, he wouldn't have survived to see this day. Lucy struggled and screamed. This is all a misunderstanding. We just wanted him to learn to be more humble. Shut up. Officer Robert's powerful voice cut through the air. He glared at the couple with an icy gaze. The 2 of you are being charged with elder abuse, child abuse, and illegal exploitation of assets. Prepare to face justice. Lucy's face turned pale as tears streamed down her cheeks. No. You can't arrest us like this. Jason, do something. But Jason said nothing. He just stood there, his eyes empty, realizing for the first time that he had completely lost. A moment later, 2 officers dragged them to the police car. Before the door slammed shut, Matthew stepped forward and looked his father straight in the eyes. I once wanted to have a good father. The boy's voice trembled, but it was firm. But you're nothing more than a cruel man. Jason lowered his head, unable to meet his son's eyes. The police car drove away. Jason and Lucy had lost all their power. At the hospital, Matthew sat beside his grandfather's bed, holding his hand tightly. Mr. Stephen had been given 4 fluids, and his pale face had regained a slight hint of life. Gracie stood beside him, her eyes red with emotion. Thank heaven you survived. Mr. Stephen looked around, his voice weak but filled with gratitude. I owe you all so much. James, Gabriel, Matthew, all of you. Matthew shook his head, his eyes shining with joy. No, you don't owe anyone anything. We just did the right thing." The next morning, news of Jason's crime spread across the town. People whispered and gossiped, outraged by what he had done. Newspapers ran bold headlines. Businessman arrested for abusing his own father, neighbors shocked by the truth. Images of Jason and Lucy being taken away by the police flooded every front page. People began boycotting his company. Business partners cut ties with him. His bank accounts were frozen for investigation. Jason had lost everything. As for Lucy, the once arrogant woman, she now sat in the holding cell, trembling at the thought of spending years in prison. Justice was finally being served. After everything, Matthew realized he was no longer afraid of his parents. He was no longer the timid child who always bowed his head before Jason. He had learned something important: standing up for what is right is always the right choice. One morning, Matthew walked into his grandfather's hospital room, holding a warm cup of milk. "Grandpa, how do you feel today?" Mr. Stephen smiled, his eyes filled with love. "Much better, thanks to you." Matthew placed the cup on the table and gently said, "I want you to come home with me. I don't want you to be in a cold place anymore." Mr. Stephen fell silent for a long moment. His eyes glistened with tears. "Are you serious, Matthew?" "Yes, I am." Matthew nodded firmly. "I'll take care of you, just like you took care of me." For the first time in months, Mr. Stephen truly smiled. 1 week later, Mr. Stephen was officially discharged from the hospital. As he stepped outside, he was stunned to see the entire town waiting for him. They applauded, welcoming him back. Mr. James stepped forward and shook his friend's hand firmly. "Welcome home." Mr. Gabriel nodded. "From now on, you're not alone." Mr. Stephen looked at the crowd, then at Matthew. The boy held his hand tightly and grinned brightly. For the first time in years, Mr. Stephen felt warmth in his heart. Even though he had lost his wealth, he still had something far more valuable: a real family. And Matthew, that little boy, had proven that no matter how small we are, when we stand up for what is right, we can change an entire destiny. 3 weeks after their arrest, Jason and Lucy officially stood trial. News of Mr. Stephen's abuse had spread throughout the town, drawing widespread attention from the local media. The courtroom was packed with people. Everyone wanted to witness the trial of the two cruel individuals who had tormented an elderly father. Mr. Stephen, though still weak, had been permitted by his doctor to attend the trial, escorted by Matthew and Mr. James. Matthew held his grandfather's hand tightly, his voice filled with determination. "We'll see them pay for what they've done, Grandpa." Mr. Stephen said nothing, but his trembling hand gave a gentle squeeze in silent encouragement. The two defendants were led in, their hands cuffed, their expressions tense. Jason looked more haggard than before, his clothes were wrinkled, his eyes exhausted. The arrogance he once carried was gone. Lucy was different. She still tried to maintain an air of pride, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. The judge, a stern-looking middle-aged man named Edward Ramsey, struck his gavel and announced the beginning of the trial. "We are here today to examine the charges against Jason Miller and Lucy Thompson for elder abuse and child abuse." The courtroom fell silent. Tension filled the air. The first witness to testify was Dr. Albert Carter, the physician who had treated Mr. Stephen. He stood, his sharp gaze fixed on the defendants. "I confirm that Mr. Stephen was admitted to the hospital in a state of severe malnutrition, with dangerously low body temperature, and clear signs of prolonged starvation. If young Matthew hadn't acted in time, he likely would not have survived." Murmurs spread throughout the courtroom. The outrage in the room intensified. Next, Mr. James took the witness stand. "I have known Mr. Stephen for over 40 years. He is a devoted father and a loyal friend. No one could have imagined that his own son would treat him with such cruelty." Jason lowered his head, unable to look at anyone. Lucy clenched her fists, her face rigid. But the most devastating blow came when Matthew stepped onto the witness stand. The boy stood tall, his gaze unwavering. Judge Ramsey spoke gently. "Can you tell us what happened, son?" Matthew swallowed hard, then began his testimony. "My parents changed after my grandfather gave them his assets. At first, they just restricted his money. Then, they moved him into a small room and wouldn't let him see anyone. They said he was useless." The courtroom fell into dead silence. "Then, they locked my grandfather in an iron cage outside. At first, it was just for a few hours. Then it became an entire day. Then many days. They only gave him dry bread and cold water." Matthew's voice trembled, but he continued. "When I tried to help him, they hit me. My mother used a belt to beat me because I gave him food." A woman in the audience gasped in horror. "Oh my God! How could they do that to their own child?" The judge nodded, then turned to Jason and Lucy. "Do either of you have anything to say?" Lucy immediately jumped to her feet. "Your Honor, this is just a misunderstanding. Matthew is just a child, his words can't be used as evidence." Silence. The judge's authoritative voice rang through the room. "We are not relying solely on Matthew's testimony. We have video evidence, witnesses, and medical records. Do you have anything else to say in your defense?" Jason remained frozen. He knew there was no way out. After hours of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict. Judge Ramsey struck his gavel and delivered the verdict. Jason Miller and Lucy Thompson are sentenced to 15 years in prison for elder abuse and child abuse. The courtroom erupted in applause. Lucy screamed in panic. "No! I can't go to prison. This is a mistake." Jason said nothing. He simply stood there, his face pale, as if his entire world had collapsed before his eyes. Two police officers immediately stepped forward and cuffed them. Matthew stood beside his grandfather, watching as his father was dragged away. He was no longer afraid. Jason turned back to look at his son one last time, but Matthew's eyes no longer searched for love in his father's gaze. He had lost his family. A week after the trial, Matthew and Mr. Stephen officially moved into a small house in town. The neighbors came together to help renovate the place, buying new furniture and fixing up what they could. They all wanted to make up for their past mistake of not intervening sooner. That morning, Matthew and his grandfather sat on the porch, basking in the warm sunlight. Mr. Stephen took a deep breath, savoring the freedom he hadn't felt in years. "Matthew. I have a question." "Yes, Grandpa. Do you regret standing up against your parents?" Matthew was silent for a long moment. Then, he shook his head. "No, Grandpa. I did the right thing." Mr. Stephen smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "You are my hope, Matthew." The boy squeezed his grandfather's hand tightly, his eyes filled with determination. "And I will always protect you, just like you protected me." At last, after all the suffering, the two of them had found true peace. No more fear. No more oppression. Only family, love, and justice finally served. The morning sun cast its warm rays over the quiet neighborhood. No more iron cages. No more cries in the night. No more weight of oppression on Matthew and Mr. Stephen's hearts. They had won. That morning, Matthew woke up early and stepped onto the porch. He saw his grandfather sitting in his old wooden chair, sipping a cup of hot tea. Matthew smiled and ran over to sit beside him. "How do you feel today, Grandpa?" Mr. Stephen looked at his grandson, his eyes filled with love. "Better than ever, Matthew." For the first time in months, he truly felt alive, not just a shadow trapped in an iron cage by his own son. After the trial, Mr. Stephen and Matthew's story left a powerful impact on the town. People began paying more attention to the elderly living alone. They visited, helped, and cared for those in need, no longer turning a blind eye. Gracie, Jason's former housekeeper, decided to open a small restaurant to provide free meals to the less fortunate. James and Gabriel continued to support Matthew and his grandfather, helping them adjust to a normal life again. They were no longer alone. After months of living in fear, Matthew could finally do what a child was supposed to do. He started going back to school, making new friends. One afternoon, Matthew ran home, his face beaming with joy. "Grandpa, I got selected for the school soccer team today." Mr. Stephen chuckled and put down his newspaper. "Well done, my boy. When's your first game?" "Next week. You have to come watch me play." Mr. Stephen patted the boy's head. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." There was a time when Matthew feared he would lose his grandfather forever. But now, every new day was an opportunity to enjoy happiness together. While Matthew and Mr. Stephen embraced their new life, Jason and Lucy were facing a true nightmare. In prison, there was no money or power to shield them. Lucy was shunned by the other inmates. No one wanted to associate with a woman who had abused both her father-in-law and her own son. As for Jason, he had lost everything. One morning, he sat in the corner of his prison cell, silently staring at the cold, gray wall. No more lavish meals. No more grand mansions. No more respect. Only loneliness remained. He thought of Matthew. He remembered the look in his son's eyes the day he was taken away. Matthew was no longer afraid of him. And that was when Jason realized he had truly lost his only son. One morning, Matthew received a letter. When he opened it, he saw the sender's name, Jason Miller. He frowned and handed the letter to his grandfather. "Dad sent me a letter." Mr. Stephen sighed and opened it. Inside, Jason had written, "Matthew, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I was wrong. I've lost everything, but losing you is what I regret the most." Matthew finished reading and remained silent for a long time. Then, he folded the letter and set it aside. "I don't need to read any more. It's too late." Mr. Stephen nodded. He knew that his grandson had grown far beyond his years after everything he had endured. Jason might have regrets, but they could never erase the damage he had done. One evening, Matthew and his grandfather sat on the porch, gazing up at the stars. Matthew turned to his grandfather, his voice serious. "Grandpa, I've been thinking a lot." Mr. Stephen smiled. "And what have you been thinking about, my boy?" "I want to be like you. Strong, just, and never turning my back on what's right." Mr. Stephen looked at his grandson, his eyes filled with pride. "Matthew, I know you will become an incredible person. And I will always be by your side." Matthew took his grandfather's hand and squeezed it tightly. "You're the only family I have. I will always protect you." Mr. Stephen chuckled, but inside, his heart was full of happiness. They had overcome everything. Now, only a bright future awaited them. From a frightened boy hiding in the shadows, Matthew had become a brave warrior, standing up against injustice. From a man betrayed by his own son, Mr. Stephen had found true love and loyalty in his grandson. As for Jason and Lucy, they were paying the price for their actions, with no way back. But most importantly, justice had prevailed. And love had been reborn. Matthew and his grandfather had found a new beginning, a life that no one could ever take away from them. They had won. The story of Mr. Stephen and Matthew stands as undeniable proof of the power of justice, courage, and love. It reminds us that greed and cruelty will always be punished, while perseverance and kindness will lead to victory. Though just a child, Matthew had the courage to stand against evil and protect the one he loved. And in the end, their story proves one simple truth. Family isn't just about blood, it's about love and protection. Justice may come late, but it always wins.